Good morning. We're continuing with the pursuit or the chasing this week. We're looking at two kind of response plays, and they're called the outer takings. So I'll read to you the text and then how I practice them. The technique written hereafter is called the external figure outer taking. So here's Ringeck's description of the first one. The two outer takings, those are two pursuits of the sword performed like this. When he mishews in front of you, pursue him. If he then parries it, remain with the sword at his and test whether he is soft or hard with the movement. If he then raises strongly upward with the sword with strength, hang your sword outside over his and stab him to the lower opening. So let's talk about that first one. So if you remember, the chasing is, we were given two last week. One is if they're chambering for an attack and we can chase them in and preemptively strike or thrust them, great. The other one is if we get them to mishew, airball in front of us, and then we come in behind that strike. And this is a response to that. So now our opponent has realized that they're airballing and they're going to parry. So I think we should practice this to both sides, but I think the most common way this is going to happen is you're going to end up crossed on your weak side. Because the most common mishew is somebody just throws a general overhow, and if somebody realizes they've airballed, the most common oh shit is this. Right? They're not very likely going to come around and parry you to the other side. So you're going to end up crossed to the weak side. So I think that we should practice this first outer taking from our weak side. So if I have sprung back and then passed forward, I'm looking to create the air ball and then strike them, and they parry, very likely we're crossed here. And so what's going to happen is if they're pressing us up, and this is going to take a little bit of visualization, my opponent is pressing me up, I'm going to wind my sword point to the outside and go for a low thrust. This is kind of a mutier in style motion. So we spring back, we look to hit them with the chase, but they parry, they're pushing us up. So we're gonna take our point and weave it to the outside over the top, turn into a low thrust. So we're getting to the outside of their sword. Now, it could happen on the other side. Either they throw in a combination and they are airballed the other way, or they've kind of recovered in a weird way. So we should practice striking and then doing the same thing. They're pressing us up. We're gonna wind our point to the outside, and then we're going to get over their sword, but we're thrusting into that low target. So this is something we should practice on both sides. I just find in sparring, usually I end up on my weak side. So the way I practice this on my pel is I'll be in my guard. I will swing up in the back. And then when I'm turning to this weak side, I like to do it with a step, just so I'm a little less crossed up. And then again, I'm looking for that lower open. And then again, if I spring back and then hit, and now for somehow they got on this side and they're pressing me up, I'm gonna roll my back edge, point to the outside of their sword, and again I'm going to the low opening. So it's a little hard to picture. We are getting into some of the material that's maybe a little bit harder to learn in a vacuum against a pel. This is definitely something that's better with a partner, so you can work against the pressure of their weapon. But as some places are still in lockdown, this at least gives us something to play with on the pel. So one more time at the camera for this first outer taking, spring back, pursue, we're getting pressed up, wind the point to the outside of their sword, and then attack the low opening on one side, spring back, pursue, getting pressed up to the other side, point to the outside of their sword, and then again attack the low opening. One more time on the pel, spring out, pursue, outside, low opening, spring back, pursue, getting pressed up, wind outside, to the low opening. All right, luckily, second one's a little bit more simple, and I think a little bit easier to picture against your pel opponent. And here note a good pursue at the sword from the under hews. The second outer taking, when you fence carefully out of under hews or otherwise out of lower movements, and the Danzig and the Lou specifically say if you're in Alber, so this can just happen from any low position. If he then rushes you and winds onto your sword sooner than you come up with it, remain with the strong sword below it his. If he then works your upper opening, follow after with the sword with a long edge, take the weakness of his sword and press down and stab him into the face. So somehow we ended up with our opponent's sword on top of ours. So we might have thrown an undercut and they got onto us maybe a little sooner, they jammed our cut, or we're in Alber and they surprise us when we get stuck. Somehow we have ended up under our opponent's sword. That's the most important thing. How we got there, kind of irrelevant, but these undercuts or from this low guard are the two most common things. If they look to get on top of our sword and then roll up to attack us into a high opening, we're going to keep this pressure. What you want to think of is you're going to keep this pressure, you're going to lift, and then you're actually going to lift and bring your sword back a little bit because we want to get the weak of their sword onto our strong. So if we stay out here and we're kind of mid-blade to mid-blade, or even worse, kind of strong to mid-blade, we're not going to get very, very good leverage. So we're trying to regain the leverage, win the leverage game. So we're going to pull up and back a little bit to get the weak of their sword into our cross, and then we're going to drop and come into the base. So I think a good way to practice this is maybe start from Alber, and we can just practice here, picking up, dumping. And I like, because Ringeck says specifically lead edge, we're not turning to do this. This is not a winding issue. So we're pulling up here. I like to allow the pommel to shift in my hand so that when I come up with my lead edge and then drop, I'm not going to compromise the position of my wrist. So lift, drop, thrust. Okay, we can also do that again from that lower opening. Attack with an underhow, boom, lift, drop, thrust. So these are what are called the two kind of outer takings. They are additional responses from the pursuit or the chasing that we saw earlier. So just really quickly, the first one is when they parry our first pursuit, we've caused them to airball. We're trying to hit them behind their cut. So we've tried to get them to miss and then hit them in the gap. But we have a savvy opponent, so when they miss, they turn and they parry that. So now we have to do this outer taking. So again, create the miss, come in for the pursuit. We get pressed up, point to the outside, and then we're going for that low opening to either side. Miss, pursuit, being pressed, low opening. Or we got stuck underneath our opponent, either with an underhow or just coming from this low position. We get here, we're going to lift to regain that leverage, drop, and this is a high thrust. So those are the two outer takings. Again, this is a little harder just as a Pell drill, but I think it's worth playing with. As soon as you get in a partner that you can do this with swords, I think it'll make a little bit more sense. But play with these, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next week.